Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to take another look at flow control. And this video is sort of meant to be a capstone video, if you would, or a summary video of this little mini series focusing on the if statements. You will appreciate the irony once we get done with this example that in order to be able to properly include our if statements demos into our fundamentals demo, that ultimately you have to use an if statement to be able to leverage the switches from the console. So essentially what we have is a little bit of a dilemma. Do I show you how to use switches and the if statements to be able to triage your command line arguments first, or do I show you how to use if statements in isolation? And so what I've decided to do is to kind of give you both options, and that in the earlier videos, we went ahead and written all of these functions, and what we had to do is we had to turn them on and off. Now, at the time that I post this video, I may have more examples, so you'll probably have more if statement examples than what you see in this particular example. I just wanted to stop at this point and actually properly include this in our fundamentals demo. If anything, this will make sense much later on when you start looking at some of our other more sophisticated switches in our fundamentals demo series. But basically, at this point, you can see the problem that every time I want to run one of our examples, well, I have to comment it out and then turn another one on. So for instance, in this case, I'm going to turn off my fifth example, and I'm going to turn on my second example so that ultimately then I can run it from the command line. I'm simply just going to follow through this here. And you can see here that it is, in fact, our second example. And to be quite honest with you, this is kind of nonsense. The idea here is that we have to have a better way to be able to leverage our console application. And the easiest way to do that is to simply leverage the input arguments. Now, I've went ahead and included this little for loop up here for you. We will talk about it in later videos. If you already have not done so, I encourage you to make sure that you have this in your code. The idea here is that this simply will check what arguments are being passed to your executable. And to understand how this works, I'm simply going to turn this off. I'm going to build this one more time, and I'm simply going to run our application with essentially no functioning code in main other than that print statement and the for loop. And so you can see here that all it's doing is printing out the arguments on the command line, including the executable name. It turns out in C that the 0th argument is the executable. And then anything else I pass, well, that just simply becomes an argument then that we can use later on, including arguments with spaces. And you can see here that I have something else. You can see here now I have a total of 3 arguments, with the 0th argument being the fundamentals demo, and so on. So what we're going to do is we're going to leverage that to incorporate our if statement examples by simply keeping track of the number of arguments as well as what the argument is. And so the simplest way to go about doing this is to go ahead and use the argument count of 2, and we'll simply check to see that our argc is equal to 2. And then what we'll do is we will combine that now with a function that allows for us to see what that argument is. In this case, it's going to be our string compare I function. And our string compare I function can be used to compare whatever that second argument is, or argv square brackets 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to check to see whatever that switch is that we are passing. In this case, it's going to be our if underscore statements underscore 01. And if it turns out there is a match between those two, well, that means there's 0 differences. And if both of those conditions are true, in other words, that my argument count is equal to 2, and the second argument, or argv square brackets 1, looks like my if statements underscore 01, well, all I want to do is then call my if statements underscore 01 example. And we're going to simply reproduce this multiple times by doing else ifs. And effectively, we're going to use the exact same condition multiple times, except we're going to change what the switch is. In other words, if our count is 2 and my switch, or my second switch rather, is if statements underscore 02, well, that just simply meant that I intended on calling that second if statements example. And at this point, I think you can probably see the pattern. In other words, I'm just going to go ahead and do a little bit of copying and pasting here. And we can do it for the third, the fourth, the fifth example, and then we'll also throw in an else. We'll clean up some of our comment blocks here, make some changes here to handle the third example, the fourth example, and the fifth example, and then make sure that we're calling the corresponding function. And then under the else, well, we'll simply make a call to our help. Now, if you don't yet have the help function incorporated, I showed you in an earlier video how to include that. It turns out that you're actually going to see this process many, 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 many more times in a lot of the other videos. So don't be too worried if you're a little intimidated by this. This is just meant to be a first pass at this, or one of your first passes at seeing it. I'll link some additional videos for you to follow along with, including a better explanation of how to navigate the command line in the comments. But at this point, we can go ahead and build this. And now what was our boring executable that we had to recompile every time we made a change to it, now we'll simply accept a switch of the correct spelling. So if statements underscore 01, for example, we'll call the if statements underscore 01 example. That was asking for us to enter in the temperature, and you can see here that it tells us to please wear shorts. Now, if you haven't got these working yet, I encourage you to go back and take a look at the earlier videos. But the idea here is now that you can control each of our demos here. And we'll jump ahead to, for instance, our fifth one, where it asks us, is it raining? What is the temperature? 55. Please take a jacket, and so on. And also, you'll notice that if we put in something that doesn't make sense, it simply calls the help. Now, I want to update the help when I have time, as well as passing something else or some nonsense switch. You see that once again, I get the help. Now, I encourage you to go ahead and follow up with this, perhaps get some of your additional functions that you've been practicing with, working with this if structure. But again, we kind of had to go over if statements a little bit for you to appreciate then the nature of this combinational statement here, where it's checking two conditions. Note the nested parentheses, and also that each condition in itself has to be true for the entire statement to be true. And also, if the first condition is false, the second condition is not evaluated. So as always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and thank you for watching.